I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in Texas, but I'm talking to you about this because if it's happening in Texas, God only knows what's happening in your state. I wanted to bring somebody on who really watches this for a living. His name is Brandon Waltens. He does the Texas Scorecard, and every day he does, headlines of what's going on, and he watches this every weekday at 5, YouTube, X, and podcast platforms. There is an impeachment going on of probably the strongest Attorney General in the nation, the one here in Texas, Ken Paxton. He's been on this show several times. I know Ken, but I don't have a horse in this race. If he's guilty of a crime, he should be punished. But it is really beginning to look, and I stayed off this story until the testimony was out, and I have to tell you, something is very wrong in Texas, and Texans better pay attention to this. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Glenn.
So, overall, can you quickly just say, what this is supposedly about, and then let's talk about the actual witnesses?
Yeah, so how did we get here? Essentially, 3 years ago, you had this group of employees at the Office of the Attorney General who accused Ken Paxton of wrongdoing, of abusing his office to help a friend, essentially. And they went to the FBI. They reported him. And that sort of set into motion what we now have 3 years later, this impeachment process, which many of those impeachment charges are based off of. Back in May, over Memorial Day weekend, while a lot of people were maybe grilling out or at the lake or whatever, the House met on a Saturday. They voted to impeach Ken Paxton based on testimony that wasn't sworn testimony. Ken Paxton wasn't made aware of their investigation until it came out 48 hours before the vote. And the House members themselves weren't able to look at the actual testimony. They had to rely on the word of the House's investigators. And so,
and Ken, if I'm not mistaken, was not allowed to respond in his own defense.
Right. And so you had a lot of these sort of things that made people look at this and say, this is odd. Well, just like D.C., the House does the impeachment, goes over to the Senate to determine whether or not they convict, which would actually remove him from office. And so for the last few months, there's been a lot of talk from those who have been pushing this impeachment saying, just wait until you see this testimony, wait till you see the evidence. You're going to be blown away by what we have. And yet, this trial started last week, and so far, and we're more than halfway through this, the testimony has really, really been weak.
I'd say a little beyond weak. There's no evidence of a crime. I mean, let me just read something. This was the third whistleblower. The concern began when Paxton advocated for the AG's office to open an investigation into Nate Paul, that is his friend and donor, alleged mistreatment by the FBI and Texas DPS during a raid. Paul's contention was that the feds did him dirty by illegally altering the search warrants after the fact to expand their scope just to get him. His technical experts theorized that there was altered metadata in the digital versions that proved the documents had been changed. Maxwell quickly developed the opinion, that's the whistleblower, the opinion that Nate Paul was a criminal that we should not be associated with. Accordingly, he had dragged his feet and ultimately refused to open a formal investigation into the alleged FBI and DPS misconduct. Paxton, convinced of the idea that the FBI was untrustworthy, well, that's far-fetched, he eventually hired outside counsel to help explore and adjudicate Paul's claims, an act that would eventually become the primary catalyst for the whistleblower complaints. Now, did anything come of that outside investigation?
No, and the thing is that when you see these people testify, I mean, numerous of these former employees of the Office of the Attorney General have talked about how insane, literally that's what one of these people said, it would be insane to investigate the FBI, that essentially they trust them wholeheartedly. that there would be nothing. I mean, literally, one of them was asked, "Is there anything that maybe happened over the last 2, 3, 4 years that might change your trust in the FBI?" They said no. Of course, that's at odds with Texas voters. I mean, Republican primary voters. We have a poll from after the Mar-a-Lago raid that shows that 73% of Texas Republican primary voters have a negative opinion of the FBI.
What a shock. So I'm reading this, and my first thought was, and I dismissed it out of hand. I don't even know why it came to me, but I'm reading all of the testimony, and I'm thinking to myself, this is George Bush. This is the George Bush wing of the party that trusts the FBI, is denying that there's a problem in America. The problem is the Republican voters, all of that crap. And then I continue to read on, and it looks like the whistleblowers do have a relationship with George P. Bush. Is there anything to this, that this is a Bush ambush?
You know, there's been a couple moments during the testimony of the past week where the Bush family has been invoked, and it looks like perhaps they were somehow involved in this. One of those being that when the whistleblowers went to the FBI and reported Paxton, by the way, without even asking him or talking to him beforehand, and they also said they had no evidence when they went. But when they were preparing to go to the FBI on that same day, George P. Bush was reactivating his law license. George P. Bush would eventually challenge Ken Paxton in the Republican primary last year. He lost 2-1 in the runoff. Mm-hmm. And then you also have a case where Johnny Sutton, who is a Bush lawyer, somebody who was a U.S. attorney under Bush, has been very close with the Bush family. He has been representing some of these whistleblowers for the last 3 years and hasn't sent them a bill, hasn't been paid, has essentially been representing them pro bono. And so that's just another piece of this puzzle that people are looking at and saying, it looks like someone else, some outside force is involved here.
Honestly, the people who brought this impeachment the way they brought it should be impeached themselves. I don't, the one thing I do hear about Paxton is he's just a freight train, and he's not good at playing the game and, making friends and influencing people, whatever. Well, neither was John Adams, and I'm not comparing him to John Adams. I'm just saying temperament-wise, John Adams was not a popular guy. But you do not bend the rules to get rid of somebody. If he's a criminal, if he did something criminal, then I am for his impeachment. But if this is just because he hasn't made the right friends or a Bush wants him out or whatever it is, the people involved in this, because it's been so shady the way they did this, I think they should be impeached.
And certainly there's been a lot of anger, especially among Republican voters. It's one thing when we see what's happening with the president, where you see Democrats going after, using the criminal justice system, using these impeachments to go after him. It's another when you're in Texas and you have Democrats and establishment Republicans going along with it.
It's really bad. Really, really bad. Anything to the thought that this happened the week that Paxton said, hey, why is our Speaker of the House giving, chairmanship to the Democrats? We don't need friends like this. And then it was later that week that the impeachment thing happened. Was there any connection?
Well, I think absolutely. There's been a divide. Look, Speaker Dade Phelan, who's the establishment guy that runs the House, who puts Democrats in power, he has been at odds with not only Ken Paxton, but the conservative grassroots who have repeatedly elected Paxton. And so certainly there's no coincidence there. There's certainly been a lot of bad blood between the establishment and Ken Paxton. It just shows why they've worked so hard to try to essentially overturn the election and get him out of office.
And quickly, what do your sources tell you? How's this going to fare? How's this going to turn out?
Yeah, so they need 2/3 in order to permanently remove him from office. That vote is expected to take place maybe Friday, Saturday, later this week. It's a little tough. You have to kind of do napkin math because these senators are under gag orders. But I would say that especially after people testifying that they essentially had no evidence, which is what we repeatedly saw last week. I'm hearing a lot of the senators are getting very, very frustrated that House members put them in this position where they have to sit through this. And I think that ultimately that's something they're going to be considering whenever they make their decision.
But you'll get all the Democrats. So how many Republicans do you need?
I think you need 10 if I recall.
10 weasels.
Yeah.
All right. I hope not. Thank you so much for reporting on this and bringing us the story. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Brandon Waltens, he is Texas Scorecard. You can find Texas Scorecard wherever you get to your podcast and YouTube and X every day at 5 o'clock.
And just one quick thing, because in case you missed the show yesterday, it sort of rolls off the tongue to say, oh, well, this was brought without any evidence. Those are the words of the people who brought the accusations.
Yeah, we have no evidence.
They said, they were asked specifically, did you have any evidence when you brought this case? And the guy said no.
The most credible said, it's just my feeling.
Right. Like, we thought he had some illegal activity, so we brought it to their attention. Did you have any evidence? No.